There was a man whose name made people feel fear. A man who didn't just defeat his enemies. He burned them alive, poisoned them, and killed them in front of the world. His name, Saddam Hussein. But the question is, was Saddam really a monster? Or was he just a puppet used by powerful countries and then left to die? He was a poor boy from a small village. But one day the whole of Iraq bowed to him. All he wanted was power. And to protect that power, he could do anything, even kill his own people. But what mistake did he make? That the world's strongest country, Null America, came after him. Was it just a war, or was something hidden behind it? Today we'll uncover the full story of Saddam Hussein, his rise, his secrets, and how his empire came to a deadly end.
Saddam Hussein was born on April 28, 1937 in a poor village called Al-Auja near Tikrit, Iraq. His family was very poor. His father disappeared before Saddam was born, and some say he died or ran away. His mother was so broken after this that she tried to give Saddam away to another family. As a child, Saddam lived with his uncle, Khairallah Tulfa, a former army officer who hated foreign powers like Britain. From a young age, Saddam was told that Iraq should be strong and free, no matter what the cost. These ideas stayed in his heart forever. Saddam didn't go to school until he was 10 years old, but once he started, he worked hard and became interested in politics. He admired powerful men like Joseph Stalin and believed in ruling with fear. In his teenage years, he joined a political group called the Ba'ath Party. This party believed in Arab unity and strong leadership. Saddam quickly rose through the ranks, using his intelligence and bold actions. At just 22, he took part in a failed attempt to kill Iraq's prime minister. After that, he escaped to Egypt, where he studied law and learned more about politics. He returned to Iraq years later, smarter and more dangerous. By the 1960s, Saddam was no longer just a boy from a village. He had become a rising political force, ready to do anything to take power. But no one knew then that this poor village boy would one day become a dictator, rule with an iron hand, and change the future of Iraq forever. After returning to Iraq in the early 1960s, Saddam Hussein was no longer just a political dreamer. He had a plan. He knew that to rise in Iraq's government, he needed power, fear, and patience. He rejoined the Ba'ath Party, which was secretly preparing to take control of the country. In 1963, the Baathists overthrew Iraq's government and took power. But their rule didn't last long. Saddam was arrested and thrown into jail. But prison didn't break him. In fact, it made him even stronger. While in jail, he built connections, planned strategies, and waited for his moment. After escaping prison in 1967, Saddam became the party's secret weapon. In 1968, the Ba'ath Party took over Iraq again, and this time they stayed in power. Saddam became the right-hand man of President Ahmed Hassan al-Bakr. But behind the scenes, Saddam was slowly becoming the real leader. He built Iraq's secret police, controlled the army, and removed anyone who stood in his way. Politicians disappeared. Enemies were silenced. Saddam's name began to spread like fear in the wind. By the late 1970s, Saddam had taken control of everything. The president was only a name. The real power was Saddam. Then in 1979, al-Bakr resigned. Some say Saddam forced him to. And just like that, Saddam Hussein became the president of Iraq. But he didn't stop there. Just days after becoming president, he called a meeting and ordered the execution of anyone he believed was not loyal to him. That moment showed the world Saddam didn't just want power, he wanted full control. He had finally reached the top, but the world had no idea what this man would do next. In July 1979, Iraq's President Ahmed Hassan al-Bakr suddenly stepped down. The reason? He claimed it was due to health problems, but many believe it was not his choice. It was Saddam Hussein's plan. For years, Saddam had been building his power behind the scenes. He controlled the military, the intelligence services, and the Ba'ath Party. He knew everything that happened in the country, and he knew how to remove anyone who stood in his way. So when al-Bakr stepped down, Saddam quickly took the seat of power. He was now the president of Iraq, but just becoming president wasn't enough. Saddam wanted to make sure no one could ever challenge him. Just days after becoming president, he called a meeting with top Ba'ath Party officials. In front of everyone, Saddam read a list of names. Those people, he said, were traitors, spies who were plotting against Iraq. One by one, men were dragged out of the room. Some were his friends, some had supported him for years. But it didn't matter, they were executed, and the message was clear. Saddam trusted no one. This terrifying act shocked the nation. It was no longer just politics. It was fear, domination, and absolute control. From that day on, Saddam ruled Iraq like a king, but not a kind one, a dictator. He placed his image in every street, school, and home. His speeches were broadcast across the country. People were forced to cheer for him, even if they were scared. Saddam had turned Iraq into a land of silence, where no one could speak against him. The boy from Tikrit had now become one of the most feared leaders in the Middle East, and the world had just started to watch. In 1980, just 1 year after becoming president, Saddam Hussein made a dangerous decision. He invaded Iran. Iran had just gone through a revolution. Its new leader, Ayatollah Khomeini, wanted to spread Islamic rule across the region. Saddam saw this as a threat. He also believed Iran was weak and broken from the revolution. So he thought this was the perfect time to strike. On September 22, 1980, Iraqi jets bombed Iranian airports. Thousands of Iraqi soldiers crossed the border. Saddam believed the war would end quickly. He thought Iran would surrender in just a few weeks. But he was wrong. The war dragged on for 8 long years. Millions of soldiers fought. Hundreds of thousands died. Both countries lost entire cities. It became one of the deadliest wars of the 20th century. Saddam used everything, from tanks and missiles to chemical weapons. Yes, Saddam used poison gas, even on civilians and his own people, the Kurds, who he believed were helping Iran. The world was shocked, but Saddam didn't care. He wanted to win at any cost. As the war continued, both sides grew weaker. The battlefield became a place of horror, filled with mud, fire, and death. And in the end, no one truly won. In 1988, after 8 years of destruction, both Iran and Iraq agreed to a ceasefire. Millions were dead or wounded. Economies were shattered. But Saddam still held on to power. He told his people Iraq had won, even though the country was drowning in debt. And now, Saddam had a new problem, a very big one. He needed money, fast. So he turned his eyes toward another target, a small, rich country called Kuwait. And that decision would change everything. By 1990, Saddam Hussein was desperate. The Iran-Iraq war had drained Iraq's money. The country owed billions in debt, especially to its neighbor Kuwait. But instead of asking for help, Saddam chose war. He accused Kuwait of stealing oil from Iraq's fields and of keeping oil prices low, which hurt Iraq's economy. But deep down, Saddam had bigger plans. He wanted Kuwait's oil and full control of the Persian Gulf. So on August 2nd, 1990, Iraq's tanks rolled into Kuwait. The invasion was fast. Within hours, Saddam's forces took over the small country. He declared Kuwait as Iraq's 19th province. The world watched in shock. But Saddam had made a huge mistake. The United Nations quickly condemned the invasion. Countries around the world united against Iraq. And soon, the most powerful army in the world was on its way, led by the United States. Operation Desert Storm began in January 1991. It was a massive air and ground attack. For 42 days, Iraq was bombed by American jets, missiles, and high-tech weapons. Saddam's military was crushed. His soldiers surrendered by the thousands. By the end of February, Kuwait was free, but Saddam was still in power. Before retreating, Iraqi forces set over 600 Kuwaiti oil wells on fire, turning the sky black with smoke. It was an act of revenge and a warning. Saddam had lost the war, but he wanted the world to feel his anger. At home, Saddam declared victory, even though his army was broken and Iraq was under heavy sanctions. But he was not done. He had survived another war, and now he would tighten his grip on Iraq even harder. But behind the scenes, the countdown to his final fall had already begun. After the Gulf War ended in 1991, Saddam Hussein was still in power, but Iraq was shattered. His army was crushed, the country's economy was broken, and the United Nations had placed harsh sanctions on Iraq. These sanctions blocked trade, froze Iraq's money, and caused massive shortages of food and medicine. Millions of innocent people suffered, children starved, hospitals ran out of supplies. Life in Iraq became a nightmare. But Saddam didn't care. Instead of helping the people, he focused on protecting his rule. He built dozens of palaces for himself, huge golden castles with fountains and gardens, while ordinary Iraqis were living in poverty. Saddam ruled with fear. He ordered the arrest, torture, and execution of anyone who spoke against him. People disappeared without a trace. His secret police were everywhere. At the same time, Saddam used propaganda to make himself look like a hero. His face was on every wall, every billboard. School children were taught to praise him. On TV, he appeared strong and kind, but behind the scenes, he was ruling like a dictator. In the south of Iraq, Shiite Muslims tried to rise up against him. In the north, Kurdish groups demanded freedom, but Saddam responded with brutal force. Villages were bombed, whole communities were destroyed, and yet he stayed in power. The world watched but did nothing. The United States hoped the people of Iraq would rise up and remove him. But Saddam's grip was too tight, the people were too scared, and the suffering continued. But Saddam didn't know a storm was coming. Because far away in the United States, leaders were watching, and they believed Saddam was hiding something deadly, and that belief would lead to his final downfall. By 2003, the world had changed, and so had the United States. After the 9/11 attacks, the US government believed that Saddam Hussein was hiding weapons of mass destruction, deadly chemical or nuclear weapons that could be used in future attacks. President George W. Bush claimed Saddam was a threat to the entire world. Saddam denied everything. He said Iraq had no such weapons. UN inspectors searched the country but found nothing. Still, the US didn't trust him. So, without UN approval, the United States and its allies prepared for war. On March 20th, 2003, the skies over Baghdad lit up with explosions. It was called Shock and Awe, a powerful non-stop bombing campaign meant to destroy Saddam's regime quickly. Missiles rained down. Government buildings, military bases, and communication centers were reduced to rubble. American and British troops entered Iraq from the south. City after city fell. Within 3 weeks, they reached Baghdad. Saddam had vanished. His statues were torn down. His palaces were looted. And on April 9, 2003, the world watched as American forces pulled down Saddam's statue in Baghdad's Firdos Square, a symbol that his rule was over. But the truth was, the war had just begun. No weapons of mass destruction were ever found. Iraq plunged into chaos. Violence erupted between rival groups. Bombings, kidnappings, and killings became daily life. American troops stayed in Iraq for years, trying to control the growing disaster. And Saddam, he was now on the run, hiding underground like a ghost, moving from one secret location to another. His empire had collapsed. His people were free but also afraid, confused, and angry. And the hunt for Saddam Hussein had officially begun. For 9 months, Saddam Hussein was a ghost. After the fall of Baghdad, he disappeared into the vast deserts of Iraq. He was no longer the powerful dictator he once was. Now he was just a man, hunted like an animal. The US military had launched a massive search for him. Satellite images, informants, and thousands of soldiers were involved in the manhunt. But Saddam was clever. He used his knowledge of Iraq's terrain and the loyalty of his supporters to stay hidden. He traveled in small, secret groups, always changing his location. But the truth was, Saddam's power had faded. The once feared leader, who had controlled the fate of millions, was now a shadow, moving in fear of his own life. Then, on December 13, 2003, the world's most wanted man was finally found. In the small village of Adar near his hometown of Tikrit, US troops discovered a small underground hole. It was a simple spider hole just big enough for a man to crouch in. And inside, there he was, Saddam Hussein, wearing a dirty shirt, his face covered in a long beard. Saddam was taken alive. His capture was broadcast across the globe. People from all over the world watched as Saddam was shown to the cameras, looking defeated and broken. But for Saddam, this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a new battle. He was taken to a military base where he was interrogated by the US forces. The man who had once controlled Iraq with an iron fist was now locked in a small cell, facing charges of crimes against humanity. His empire was gone, his future was uncertain, and the world awaited justice. Saddam Hussein's capture was only the beginning of a long and dramatic chapter in his life. He was no longer the feared dictator of Iraq. Now he was a prisoner facing charges for some of the most brutal crimes in history. In 2004, Saddam was put on trial by the newly formed Iraqi government. The world watched closely. The charges against him were grave: the killing of thousands of Iraqis, using chemical weapons against civilians, and committing atrocities against the Kurdish people during the infamous Untold campaign. The trial was held in a specially constructed courtroom in Baghdad. Saddam, once a man of power, sat in front of judges and a panel of Iraqi citizens who had lived through his terror. He seemed unfazed by the situation. He defiantly denied all charges, insisting he was a hero who had been fighting for Iraq's freedom and honor. Despite Saddam's arrogant defense, the evidence was overwhelming. He was found guilty of crimes against humanity for the killing of 148 Shiite Muslims in Dujail after a failed assassination attempt on his life in 1982. The trial was controversial, but the verdict was clear. On November 5, 2006, Saddam Hussein was sentenced to death by hanging. It was a shocking moment for many who had known him as a leader of Iraq for decades. But what followed was even more dramatic. On December 30th, 2006, Saddam was executed. His death was quick, but it marked the end of an era of terror. Images of his hanging circulated around the world, and Iraq was left in a state of turmoil. Saddam Hussein, the man who had ruled Iraq with an iron fist, was gone. But the scars of his reign would remain for generations. Saddam Hussein's death marked the end of an era, but the questions surrounding his life and legacy still haunt the world. Even after his execution, the mystery of his rule and the man himself lingers like a shadow over Iraq and the Middle East. Saddam Hussein is remembered by many as a brutal dictator who used fear to control his people. He built a cult of personality, with his image plastered everywhere, in schools, streets, and even in people's homes. His power was absolute, his regime ruthless. Yet, despite his many crimes, there were also those who saw him as a symbol of strength. In a region full of chaos, Saddam presented himself as the protector of Iraq's sovereignty and dignity. But his legacy is more complex. For some Iraqis, particularly in the Sunni regions, he was a leader who unified the country and challenged foreign powers. For others, especially the Kurds and Shiites, he was a tyrant whose regime left deep scars of violence and suffering. His use of chemical weapons against civilians and his massacre of thousands of innocents have earned him a place in history as one of the most feared figures of the 20th century. But even today, many still wonder, did Saddam really have weapons of mass destruction? Was the war in Iraq justified, or was it based on false claims? His capture and trial sparked more debate than answers. And then, there's the question of whether he truly believed in his actions, or if it was all about maintaining his power at any cost. In the end, Saddam's story is one of mystery, power, and destruction, a legacy that is still being debated in the world today. His name is remembered, but the truth about his reign remains as elusive as ever. And speaking of mysterious leaders with complex legacies, Fidel Castro's story is just as captivating. If you're curious about another controversial figure in history, don't miss our next video on Fidel Castro, where we dive deep into his rise to power, his leadership, and the secrets behind his revolution. Click here to watch.